Over the last few months, we've covered extensively about the Great Reset agenda. You know, the one with the familiar tagline, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." But as the time goes on, the Great Reset agenda's vision for the world is getting more and more clear. And now the Great Reset has a clear objective to accomplish by the year of 2030 that can ultimately affect your home ownership, your retirement, and our freedom as we know it. For those that need a little bit of catch-up, the Great Reset is an agenda initiated by the World Economic Forum. Now, the agenda was first announced back in June 2020 at the start of the pandemic by a guy named Klaus Schwab, aka Darth Klaus, the most dangerous Sith Lord of our times. And what's crazy is that Klaus Schwab is not an elected leader of any country or any governing body. But yet he's managed to influence many of the world's government and corporate leaders to follow his plans and his view.
So that we penetrate the cabinets.
What?
So what exactly are the goals of the Great Resetters by the end of 2030, and how exactly is it unfolding now in the current times? And just to prove that I'm not making this up, I'll leave the entire list of articles from my own research in the video description down below. Okay, so the first and foremost goal of the Great Reset is to eradicate private ownership. Now, I mentioned already that the tagline of the Great Reset is "You will own nothing and you will be happy." And this was first introduced back in 2 years ago, but a lot of things have happened since then. For one, BlackRock was announced that they would be buying up single-family homes a neighborhood at a time. And what's even crazier is that the US Federal Reserve have been partly funding this by buying up hundreds and millions of dollars of corporate bonds for BlackRock. And to ultimately connect the dots, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink sits on the board of the World Economic Forum as a key agenda contributor. We also saw seizing of private properties in Germany last year in September, where 240,000 apartment units were seized by the city government of Berlin, ultimately giving the government more power to run the city's public housing program. And to bring it back to the stateside, there's a prediction that the property taxes will surge next year thanks to the increased assessment value of housing across the United States. Now, this of course has the potential of causing many senior citizens on fixed income to list their property for sale as they can't continue affording the increased monthly payment. And of course, as new homes enter the market, this creates the perfect ripe conditions for big corporate landlords like BlackRock to swoop in for a mass purchase, further pushing away the possibility of private and individual home ownership. So does this mean that Great Reset wants all of us to become renters? Yeah. Instead of private ownership, the Great Reset agenda believes that everyone should participate in what's known as the shared economy, much like Airbnb and VRBO. Their goal is to have the shared economy become pretty much the economy as the norm. But the Great Reset agenda does not stop with just your ownership of property. They have a goal of being able to track you and set up omnipresent surveillance system all around the world. And enter the digital identification and surveillance. By 2030, the Great Reset agenda has a goal of increasing the use and adoption of digital identification. So instead of using your credit card to go grocery shopping, imagine a world where you can scan your fingerprint or even just your face to pay for stuff. Or let's just say you're pulled over by police. Instead of handing them a driver's license, they can just scan your face with their high-tech camera and instantly identify you. And this may sound far-fetched, but it's already happening right now in the airports. Now, I travel quite frequently, even internationally, and just a few weeks back, I was coming back from a business trip in Mexico. And yes, it was a business trip, I promise, and it was in Cancun. And as the procedure goes, I hand my US passport to the immigration officer, only to find out that he didn't even look at it. He just scanned my face, and I was clear to go and to get my luggage. So I was definitely surprised at how efficient the process was, but just to know that my face is stored as a digital data somewhere was rather interesting to say the least. Oh, and speaking of facial recognition, the other aspect of the Great Reset agenda by 2030 is to adopt a version of the social credit system all around the world. Now, already China has embraced a social credit system in select cities. And in these cities, the government has installed thousands of cameras all around the city to monitor the behavior of their citizens. And based on their behavior and online activities, each citizen is assigned a score. A good behavior would award them with higher score, whereas a bad behavior would do the opposite. So if you have a less than favorable social credit score in China, like I would, you'd be banned from being able to buy plane tickets, purchase a car, or even barred from engaging with certain types of businesses. Crazy, I know. And it's just last 2 weeks we see the Biden administration form a new governing board called the Disinformation Governance Board to monitor all online media, to police and weed out what the government deems to be disinformation, further increasing our own surveillance of the private citizens across the country. And that's not all. The Great Reset agenda wants to take this further by developing a technology to hack the human brain. And friends, I know it sounds like science fiction and something out of the movie, but last year during a World Economic Forum meeting, Dr. Yuval Harari gave a presentation to let the world know that a technology is being developed that can hack humans using brain signals and artificial intelligence. And the primary organization that's funding such technology is none other than our own Pentagon. And they claim that they're going to use the technology to treat mental illness and issues amongst their military men and women. However, what's to say that this technology can fall into the wrong hands? And finally, when it comes to our money investment, the Great Reset has a long list of goals that they want to accomplish by the year of 2030. The first is the adoption of a central bank digital currency. Now, just like cryptocurrency examples like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, and XRP, the United States Federal Reserve has begun its own version of a centralized cryptocurrency. But unlike Bitcoin that promises a decentralized currency, a CBDC would seek to do the opposite, where the Federal Reserve would have more power and control over our currency. And Biden just announced that more funding should go into the research of developing a central bank digital currency just a few months ago in March of 2022. So as we begin to see a rollout of the United States CBDC, we'll definitely see less tangible cash and more digital currency use. Ultimately, it goes back to my earlier point about digital identification. We may potentially see our digital currencies ultimately tied to our digital identification, which opens the door to your banks always being able to track where your money is going and where it was sent. Basically a foolproof ledger. But it also opens the door where our government can basically turn your digital currencies to zero if they choose to do so. Or if they believe that the economy is moving slower than they prefer, they can simply set an expiration date on your money so that you're forced to spend it to promote the circulation of the currency in the economy. But that's not all. The Great Reset agenda has a goal for your retirement plan as well. So if you're looking to retire in the next 10 to 20 years, pay pretty close attention to this. So when it comes to your investment, the Great Reset agenda is obsessed with an idea called ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. Now, to sum this up, ESG is basically a measurement of how your investment and business benefits the environment and social justice issues. Already, we're seeing big corporations adopt decisions based on ESG standards like Pfizer, which they had a whole section in their annual report about their contribution to ESG standards. But how this can turn dangerous for you is quite simple. What if you, as the private individual, disagree with the ESG standards? And what if you have a different values, beliefs, priorities that are counter to some of the ESG standards? I mean, should you get punished for it by not following the ESG standards? Well, according to the Great Reset agenda, they would say you should. The Great Reset agenda believes that investors should pay more attention to businesses and individuals who are committed to the ESG standards. So at looking at your retirement account or your investments, imagine getting assigned to an ESG score on your investment decision and getting awarded or punished based on how your investment impacts the environment and social issues. Companies like Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, State Street, E-Trade, Edward Jones, Fidelity, and even Raymond James are all pursuing some aspect of the ESG standard. And to be quite honest, I don't think all of the ESG stuff is bad. In fact, I would agree with some of the initiatives and some I would care less about. But shouldn't that decision be up to you? Like, shouldn't you be the one to decide what issues and causes you support through your financial decisions, not some corporations, right? But the very possibility that you or your investment can get punished because of your own private and individual decision is just plain absurd. So with all these goals to hit by 2030, who is exactly supporting the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum? I mean, who would support such crazy ideas? Well, you know how I mentioned that Klaus Schwab has influence over many government and business leaders? Well, let me give you the list of let's just say the who's who. We have Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, Christine Lagarde, the president of European Central Bank, Kristalina Georgieva, director of the IMF, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, aka Facebook, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, Albert Bourla, CEO of Pfizer, Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, that everyone apparently hates now, and last I'll mention, Joe Biden, the Brandon. Hey, Nick, what's that word again? Presidant? What? So, with some of the names I mentioned, these are not your small-time people. I mean, these are some of the leaders of the biggest and global organizations and governments that, again, are not small. So, yeah, it's real and it's definitely happening. And the Great Reset's goal for 2030 is already panning out. And just even recently, the United Nations announced a partnership with the World Economic Forum.
This afternoon, the Secretary General and Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, will witness the signing of a memorandum of understanding on a strategic partnership between the UN and the World Economic Forum, which outlines areas of cooperation to deepen engagement between the two institutions and to jointly accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda.
But they have a much bigger goal than just to change how we see our money, investments, and our freedom. They want to change an entire generation, and that is our children. So click on this video right here if you want to see what the Great Resets want to do with our children and how it's already unfolding.